This episode of Baking Day with Anna Olson is brought to you by Libman and Penguin Random House Canada. We'll be hearing more from them later in the episode.
Hi, I'm Anna Olson, and I'm so glad you could join me for a baking day. This podcast series is based on my cookbook of the same name, which is packed full of recipes which are meant to be baked and shared with your family and friends. In each episode, I host a special guest, and we bake a recipe from the book in our respective kitchens as we share stories, baking tips, and have a few laughs along the way. Baking is much more than just the delectable end result. It's about building memories along the way. Let me tell you about my next guest. She blogs, she vlogs, she writes, she eats. In fact, what doesn't Julie Van Rosendaal do? She is one busy lady. Julie's a food writer for the Globe and Mail newspaper, and she has written 11 cookbooks. The most recent one is called Dirty Food, and it's all about that decadent, messy comfort food we love so much. You may know her social media handle as Dinner with Julie. I've known Julie for years, and I know that you are going to love her. Julie, hello. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
All the way in Calgary. It's been ages since I've been there because, of course, I'm not getting on a plane.
Well, I miss seeing you in real life, but it's nice to be able to do this from our respective kitchens.
I know, we get to have a baking day together.
Yes.
And quite often we're doing demonstrations a room apart when we've spent so many years working at Christmas in November in Jasper together. So now we actually get to bake together and enjoy the process. So you have a copy of the Baking Day cookbook.
I do.
And I gave you no limits. You can pick whatever you want because I know what you're capable of and what we could have fun doing together. And what recipe did you pick?
I picked the sounds like Crispy Scream donuts. Sounds like Crispy Scream. I've been practicing saying Crispy Scream. It's a bit of a tongue twister.
So we'll just call them donuts at this point. Yeah.
The glazed donuts, which I love. I love a good yeast donut. And I feel like a lot of people are intimidated by the process, especially the frying of donuts. So I thought it would be a good one for us to demonstrate and just, you're so good at making people feel like they can do things and feel like everything's going to be okay. It's all going to work out. And your recipes are so solid. I've actually made a few things and they're they're fantastic.
So are you going to make the donut recipe? I give you the option in the book. You can make it by hand or you can use a mixer if you want. Which way are you going?
I thought I would do it by hand so that it would be easier for people to see the dough rather than the stand mixer. But I do usually use my stand mixer with a hook dough attachment when I make yeast doughs like this.
I've opted for the mixer, so I'm glad we've got both options for everyone to see, and we can talk through to the texture of the dough. Is it any different, one method against the other? I've already got my four cups of flour measured into my mixing bowl. Do you have bread flour?
I do have bread flour, and I was going to ask you about that because I usually use all-purpose flour for donuts, but your recipe calls for bread flour, which is a higher gluten content.
These donuts are meant to be the fluffiest, softest yeast donuts with that thin, sheer, buttery glaze on the outside. And I found I could get a good result with all-purpose flour. And I even say in the recipe, I'm not going to send you to the grocery store during a pandemic just to buy a particular type of flour. If you know you can use all-purpose, it's airier and fluffier because the yeast stays within the donut.
Yes.
That's why I use the bread flour. But the other ingredients contribute to it being so soft. I've got a third of a cup of granulated sugar. So I'm just going to add that right to the flour.
So you mentioned yeast, and one of the biggest questions that I've had throughout the pandemic is, what's the difference between instant and active dry yeast? Can I use them interchangeably? And your recipe calls for instant yeast versus active dry yeast. Instant is finer, so you can add it right to your dry ingredients. I didn't have any instant yeast. I happen to have a lot of active dry yeast, but I think it's a good opportunity to talk about what to do if you have one and not the other.
Why don't you hold up your yeast to the close-up cam, and then mine, I don't know if we can see the difference. So you can see how my yeast is really, really fine, but yours, it's almost pearlized. It's little pearl drops.
The grains are larger, which is the only difference. I use about the same quantity. I mean, I find that finer instant yeast is more compact, so you can get away with less. But the biggest thing is that you have to dissolve active dry yeast first, whereas with quick instant yeast, you don't, correct?
Exactly. So I'm going to add mine right to the mixing bowl with the flour and the sugar.
Okay.
Because using instant yeast, I don't have to dissolve it. But if you have your room temperature milk on hand, if you add that, your regular yeast, and give it a stir, that'll give it time to dissolve and bloom.
Exactly, exactly. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about that because I feel like it's confusing for a lot of people. And some people think they have to go out and buy instant yeast, and can't use active dry.
Yeah. Or the other way around.
Exactly. Or they add the active dry to the dough, and then once you mix your dough, it doesn't dissolve, and you get those little sort of nubbins of yeast.
That is very true. And I think you brought up a good point about the dry versus the instant, and does the proportion stay the same? And I find for the sort of single batch recipe like this, which my measurement is 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, the same that you would get in a little packet.
Exactly.
That small batch, it doesn't change. It's if you are going into commercial baking and you are making 100 donuts and batching up this recipe 6 times, then you start looking at converting the yeast. But for 2 1/4 teaspoons, whether instant or dry active, is absolutely fine.
Awesome. Yay. And the proofing part of it, I mean, it used to be that commercial yeast wasn't as stable. And so to make sure that it was still active, if you haven't baked for maybe 6 months, you would wait for it to sort of bloom and make sure that it was active, right?
True. And now it's really just to dissolve it now. You don't have to do that active test.
Exactly.
And excuse me, is there someone who has not been baking for the last 6 months?
I know. Exactly.
Well, that's why I got bulk yeast. Got that. And I'm going to measure my 1/2 teaspoon of salt into the bowl.
Yes.
When using the instant yeast, of course, you don't want it to come in direct contact with the salt. So I kind of stirred it into the flour, and now I'll just measure the salt right on top.
Awesome. Okay, so I did the same with my salt. I have kosher salt. I love that you call for fine salt, because really the kind of salt you use comes down to the texture of it, right?
And how it dissolves. So I find the fine salt in an enriched recipe like this dissolves faster. But you'll be fine here because we've got the room temperature milk. So is your yeast dissolved into your milk now?
It did, yes. It got nice and soft. And so I added it. I just went ahead and added it. And the sugar, the salt, the soft butter. This is such a great dough.
I have to weigh my butter. So I'm actually going to take my bowl off the mixer. And I don't know how you are, but I always weigh my butter. If your lines aren't straight, if you're cutting by what the package says, you could be off a little bit. And there's no way I'm going to scoop butter into a measuring cup and then scoop it out again. So,
no, exactly. I just used a stick and sliced it.
So, well, that's easier to divide. I've got a full pound that I've cut into pieces. So we're adding 90 grams. So that's the equivalent of 6 tablespoons.
I'm also an incredibly messy baker. I'm already making a mess, but that's okay because we're going to need to turn the dough out and knead it on the countertop anyway. So
exactly. And well, my background donut story, the reason I wanted to do basically a whole section on donuts for this book is, for me, donuts were that sneaky treat that I would have. My grandma would make them with me.
Yes.
My mom would not deep fry anything. She would not cook anything in oil. So that was sort of when grandma was babysitting and my parents would go out. It was like, we can make donuts now. And we would have so much fun doing it. So for me, this is the essence of baking day.
That's so great. And I don't have memories of my grandmother making donuts. She made the best butter tarts. She was the queen of butter tarts out in Windsor, Ontario. She didn't make donuts. My parents didn't either. They didn't deep fry things. We were always, very healthy. But I realized recently that I can be the aunt, and now I'm a great aunt. I can be the great aunt who makes donuts. When my niece and nephews come over, I always make sure I make donuts, because these memories that last for a lifetime, we have the power to create those ourselves. I want to be that aunt.
And I don't actually have any memory of eating the donuts. I remember she would quite often do, when we had less time, the sour cream style donut where you scoop and fry.
Yeah.
But I don't have memories of eating them, but I just remember being in the kitchen and watching them bubble away and being so excited about it.
And the smell and
Oh, I know. Ugh,
smells like the Midway.
Yeah. Fryer oil everywhere. Have you got your 1 large egg and 2 egg yolks in
I do.
mixing
Yeah.
bowl? So it's time to mix. So you're mixing with a spoon right now, and then you'll turn it out to knead. And in a minute, I'll turn on the mixer. But before I get to that, because then we won't hear anything but the mixer, I'll let this go for about 4 minutes on low speed while you're hand kneading your dough. You know what? I think this is a perfect opportunity, Julie, for us to take a sponsor break. So I'll mix my dough in the mixer. You do yours by hand, and then we'll come back and compare. What do you say?
Perfect.
Embrace the mess with Libman. Time spent in the kitchen doesn't have to be hindered by spilled sugar or messy sauces, flying cake batter or cookie crumbs, or even a sink full of dirty dishes. Go ahead, embrace the mess. From countertops, cutting boards, and cookware, to backsplashes, cabinet doors, floors, and quite literally the kitchen sink, Libman's collection of premium quality brushes, sponges, mops, and brooms designed with ergonomic features and environmentally friendly materials help you conquer kitchen cleanup easily and waste-free. So break out the bakeware and have some fun in the kitchen. Embrace the mess and live in the moment with Libman. Available at the Home Depot and Canadian Tire. And you can learn more on Facebook at Libman Canada and on Instagram at LibmanCA. So I have just turned off my mixer, and I can tell my dough is ready because it's cleaning the sides of the bowl, but it's still stuck to the bottom. When you've got a rich dough like this with the egg yolks and the butter, and that was, I really wanted to put the egg yolks and the butter in there to replicate that sort of really fluffy, light but rich donut texture. So that's why I didn't use just all whole eggs. I went with doing 2 yolks. But it makes a soft dough, so you'll find it sticks to the bottom of the mixing bowl if you're using a mixer. Now, what does yours look like? I'm gonna lift mine up. This is not gonna be glamorous.
It's the same. It's soft, it's sticky. I love that buttery, sugary egg dough. It's almost like a cinnamon bun dough.
I have made cinnamon buns from this dough before, so I can attest to that. Here's mine. So it's not sticky, but it's still kind of, it comes away from my hands, but it's soft and pliable.
It's very tacky. I was baking with my grandniece. We were making a yeast dough, and she said, it's sticky, but it's not sticking to me. And I thought that was a perfect description, because you want it to be sticky, but not so much that you're scraping it off your hands, right? But I feel like a lot of people add more flour, and then it just gets to be too much.
And especially, I think I'm glad you kneaded it by hand, because the temptation as you're kneading it by hand, if you feel it's sticky, you keep thinking you have to add more flour. So what I like to do is measure out the flour for the recipe, and I hold back some to keep adding as I'm kneading it. Because once you get to the end of kneading, it's more elastic. The proteins have been developed. So you'll find it has exactly as you've described. It's tacky, but it's not actually sticky, and you know you're all set.
Exactly. And it will smooth out and sort of swell as it rests, right?
Of course, and absorbs the flour.
Exactly.
Yeah, it'll be easier to handle in an hour, which is exactly how long this takes to rise. I'm gonna move my mixer out of the way, because otherwise I will have no space to roll.
Can I pull out my swap dough?
So both Julie and I have made enough baking and cooking videos that we know that we're not going to make you wait for an hour. So we've each prepared a dough. And I've got mine here that has been rising for an hour. So it's more than doubled in volume.
Exactly. And this one I did in my mixer. Look at that. There we go.
Here, bring it to the, see, there's mine.
The camera.
I love doing that. You get to.
Oh, me too. It's just so satisfying to work with.
I love poking my fingers in it just when it's just risen that hour. Oh, yeah. It's just a gratifying. I'm getting flashbacks of why I liked making donuts when I was little, because it's so tactile. From kneading the dough, rolling the dough, squishing it around.
I'm going to cover this one up and start with this one. Nice. Yeah, that is it's beautiful dough to work with. And it's great to get kids involved, even if there is frying. You know, you could do the frying part yourself, but there's the element of science in there with the yeast and the, dough is so tactile for kids, and the cutting and the rolling.
The dough is just so soft, and as you're rolling, it just rolls so easily without springing back, even though we used bread flour in the recipe.
That's right.
And I find, I added probably 2 tablespoons of flour to the work surface as I was rolling, and it's not sticking.
And I always minimize the amount that I put on the surface too, so that it doesn't absorb too much. But yeah, it's not sticking at all.
So we've rolled out our dough to about a 1/2 inch thick. So we're not rolling it thin like a pie pastry or cookie dough. We want these donuts to have some body and structure. So this dough is rolled out to about a 1/2 inch thick. And you've got there too?
I'm there, yeah.
I've got a baking tray and a rack ready. And so are you going to use a donut cutter? Do you have your cutter handy?
I do.
See, I have a donut cutter here, and it's got the 2 parts attached. So it's got the round that gives you the donut shape, and of course it's got the little hole in the center to cut out the donut hole. And it's got little holes on the side of it so that the air can escape and it punches through better. But I've never found it really works well. I'm gonna try one, but I think I'm gonna go, actually, you know what? No, I'm not even gonna bother using the donut cutter. I wanna use a knife, and I'm gonna make square donuts with a round hole. And that way there'll be less waste.
Oh, that's so smart. I wanna make square donuts with a round hole.
Well, make square donuts with a round hole then. You can do whatever you want.
That's the fun thing about donuts. Although I have a few old donut cutters that don't work as well, but this one works really well. I just got it from a restaurant supply store, and it just makes these perfect donuts. So I'll make some like this.
Okay, and I'm cutting mine. I'm just using a chef's knife. And the first thing, I rolled my dough into more of a square shape so that I could trim it off, and then it's easier to cut my square-shaped donuts. And the little scraps, I'm not gonna throw them away. I can either roughly cut them and fry them as little donut nibbles, or I can reshape the scraps and re-roll my donuts.
The scraps are my favorite.
Well, they're the best because no one knows they exist.
No, exactly. You have to get rid of the evidence. I always end up with these animal-looking scraps. They always look like giraffes and horses.
Well, you've got what were those that you recently posted? Screaming faces? Were those donuts?
Oh, they were donuts. Yes, that would be perfect. They, you just roll them out and then make a couple eyes and a mouth hole and then kind of stretch them so it looks like Edward Munch's The Scream.
They were hilarious. I loved it. Well, I'm cutting mine. So I trimmed away the sort of not perfect edges. So then I had a square, and I'm able to get 16 4x4 square donuts here.
Well, and this dough would work really well for mini donuts too.
Oh, it sure would.
It'd be perfect. Sometimes during the Stampede in Calgary, every July, except this July, there's a big sort of outdoor festival and a lot of mini donuts. And I make them using a shot glass and just cut little tiny donuts and then use like a chopstick to make the hole in the middle. But the great thing about the donut cutter is you get the little donut holes, right? Which are also like a bonus.
Yeah, and I'm still gonna punch holes in mine, but I have a pastry tip. It's kind of a dented one, so it's not really good on this side. It's all kind of mashed up. But it makes a nice size donut hole. And then I'm saving the little donut holes so we can fry those up separately. If you have time and patience, you should wait. Like if it takes a little longer, let the donuts rest for 20 to 30 minutes just because we did roll them up. But we'll still be fine because I'm sorry, if you're making donuts, how patient can you be? There are limits.
Exactly. We're not, superheroes. Well, we kind of are because we're making donuts, but you can only expect so much. Okay.
Super aunties.
Super aunties, exactly.
So have you got your oil?
I do. Yeah. It's on the stove behind me and I'm going to move it over to my induction burner beside me.
All right, take a second and I'm going to grab my cooling rack.
Okay.
And I'm also going to I've got a kitchen spider I'm going to use.
Me too.
Awesome. Team Spider.
It's Team Spider Woman.
A slotted spoon does work, but it holds the oil a little bit. So
Yes.
once you have one of these tools, it really is kind of an all-purpose kitchen tool. Great for, so many things.
I am making progressively smaller donuts with the scraps. I got a little jam jar. And so I'm making a range of donut sizes.
Mine are a bit random too, but that's part of the joy in it. It's supposed to look rustic. They're not supposed to look factory made. So I've got my square with the hole in it. And as I hold it, it's stretching. But then I have some that are, a little oblong. Not quite perfectly straight.
That's okay. How did your grandma's look? Did she have a cutter?
I think she had a cutter.
Yeah.
And in my mind, they were perfect.
They're fried dough. They by default are perfect. Okay, so my oil is heating. Is your oil is heating too? Is it?
It is. I'm just going to check the temperature. We want 350 is ideal so that it browns but also cooks through. Too low, they'll be soggy and heavy and greasy. Too hot, they'll turn too dark on the outside before the inside has cooked.
Exactly. Look, I made little mini ones with my fingers. So my aunt, who is Belgian, she makes croquettes, and she would take the handle of her wooden spoon and put it in the hot oil. And if it sizzled around the handle, then the oil was ready.
Okay. Are you going to do that test?
I don't want to have to wash my spoon.
I'm curious now. I want to try it. Do I have a wooden spoon?
It's actually so dry in Calgary that it doesn't work very well. I think that everything wood is just so dry. But what I do is I take a scrap of the dough.
I have a basting brush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything with a wooden handle. I take a little scrap of dough.
Yeah, my pastry brush is...
Is it sizzling around the handle?
It's bubbling.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bubbling right around the edges.
Yeah. Oh, maybe.
I didn't even know I had that in there.
I'm going to try. It usually doesn't work. Oh, it is working. I haven't done it for a while because I thought it didn't work very well in Calgary. A little scrap of bread works too, or a little bit of your dough. And then if it's smoking that's too hot, whoop, to the carburetor.
And you just make it disappear by eating it. So it's all simple. Are you going in the fryer already? Are you frying your donuts?
I put one in because it's hot enough. My oil is ready.
Yep. Okay.
Are you ready?
Well, I'm going to do the same too.
Am I jumping the gun?
Let's make some donuts.
Let's do it. Not that it's a race. Oh, I just put my rack on a donut. That'll be mine. Okay, where's my spider? So you can tell too if your donuts start to brown really, really fast. That's probably a little bit hot.
Yep.
And putting your donuts, putting a lot in will cool down the oil too. Do you find that?
I do. And so that's exactly what I did. I'm dropping in 4 donuts right now because you want to give them space. You know what? Mine are small enough. I can fit 5 in my pot.
Nice.
So you're cooking in a pot. I'm cooking in a pot. I'm using canola oil and it's only filled halfway up the pot. So that way there's no splatter. It's a lot safer. But yeah, I can fit 5 in with lots of room for them to kind of move around. They're not crowded. But I immediately turned up the heat like 2 steps just to compensate the cooling from dropping in those donuts.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm just checking the temperature just to see where I'm at.
You know, I rely heavily on the wooden spoon handle and the dough scrap test. And it looks good.
You really are doing the Auntie Julie baking method.
I am. And I'm going to smell like donuts all day.
Oh, it's going to be in our hair. It's going to be in our clothes.
Yeah.
We can't hide it. I think my grandma used to try and hide the fact that when my parents came home after that evening of babysitting, and she'd be like, oh, what did you do this evening? Oh, nothing. Meanwhile, the whole house smells like a fryer. It was pretty obvious what we were up to.
No, you can't hide it. My grandma used to, when we baked, she would take the vanilla bottle and dab a little bit behind each ear.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah. And she always smelled fantastic. And now I occasionally do it.
They've made a whole industry out of bath soaps and scented candles that smell like vanilla. I'm happy to go with just the baking.
Exactly.
So our donuts have been in for about 90 seconds, going on 2 minutes. And I can see they're nicely browned on one side.
Nice.
So now this is when you want to flip. Because I find these donuts take about 4 to 5 minutes total. So 2 to 2.5 minutes on each side.
Exactly.
And I just flip them I use my spider and I just press down on one side and just let the sort of gravity do its work and let them turn over. Mm-hmm. And you can really tell, this is the reason why you don't want to overcrowd the oil, not just the temperature, but they really do expand as they're baking. It's about 30% bigger than the donut I dropped in the first place.
I always make the holes in the middle more dramatic. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I always make them bigger than I want them to be.
If you wanted to do a filled donut, you could skip the hole and then fill it, of course, with jam or a custard or something if you were going for a different style of donut.
Yes, you have filled donuts in the book too, I noticed.
I do. Oh, the jam ones. That was another, that's more that Polish punchki style donut. So it's a slightly different dough and it's a little richer than this version, a little cakier. What I love most about this particular recipe is they're so light and fluffy, you can just forget you ate one. And then, well, you have to have another. And then, oh, I forgot. And then you have another, you know. So I've got even coloring on both sides. So I think I'm done. And you can really tell, woo, these are light.
They really are light. I can see how much they're rising in the pot. Well, and I love with a sort of a blank slate donut like these, you could do so many things with them, right? You could do like a chocolate glaze or maple or sprinkles.
Well, speaking of glaze, we want to glaze these donuts while they're still warm. So I'm going to fry some donut holes first. And why don't you keep frying? And this is a great opportunity to take a sponsor break. And when we come back, we're going to make the glaze for these warm, fluffy, light donuts. I'm excited to tell you about Flavor Bomb, the new cookbook by Bob Bloomer. In fact, instead of me telling you about it, why don't I let Bob do it himself?
I'm Bob Bloomer, the author of Flavor Bomb, a new cookbook with one goal: to make you a better cook. In Flavor Bomb, I share all the tricks, hacks, and techniques I've learned from hosting Food Network shows, breaking Guinness World Records, and working with some of the world's most celebrated chefs and street food vendors. This insider knowledge will change the way you cook forever. Plus, I'm sharing 75 addictive recipes that'll help you knock out restaurant quality dishes and make you a rock star in your own kitchen. Flavor Bomb's available now, wherever you buy cookbooks.
Penguin Random House Canada is giving you a chance to win a copy of Flavor Bomb and some of the season's hottest books. Go to penguinrandomhouse.ca/cook to enter by December 7th. That's penguinrandomhouse.ca/cook, and some restrictions may apply. And we are back. I just flipped over this last batch of donuts. So it's amazing how even through the time of when we started frying to just a little bit of time passing, that last batch really rises up even more. So these are fluffier than the first fluffy batch.
They're the fluffiest. They're progressively fluffier. My donut holes are so fluffy, I kind of have to hold them down with my spoon because they're like the little flotation devices. Ooh.
Exactly. I had to do that too. And mine are completely round. I kind of got a little distracted getting ready on my glaze. So they got a little darker than I want, but they're still fine.
Same.
And everything, yours are still nice and warm. Because the best part,
still warm.
Yeah, like seriously, we're going to wait for donuts to cool before we glaze and eat them?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Got to work with them hot.
Exactly.
These are hot.
Okay, so what I usually do when I make donuts is take the holes and mix the holes in cinnamon sugar and the sort of little bits in the scraps while they're still warm.
Well, I've got the ingredients for the glaze that's in the book. And so I am melting a 1/4 cup of butter right now. It's unsalted butter, and I've measured 1.5 cups of icing sugar into my bowl. And I've got 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla, and I've measured out 4 tablespoons of milk, but I'm going to add it a little at a time until I get that perfect consistency. It really depends how warm the butter is that will determine if you want a thin or thicker glaze to completely submerge these donuts in.
I am doing the glaze as well.
I've pulled out all sorts of sprinkles here. So if we wanted to do that sort of one-sided sprinkle dip, that recipe is a little bit different. It's 1 cup of icing sugar with 2 tablespoons of milk. That's it. That's all you do. And it's a little thicker then, so it'll stay in place and the sprinkles will stay in place.
Perfect. I have sprinkles. It's my duty as a great aunt to always have an excellent supply of sprinkles on hand. Oh, I'm going to do some of these small donuts as cinnamon sugar too, because they just remind me of Stampede, you know?
Look it. And there was no Stampede this summer. Let's
no.
see. Oh, those are adorable.
These are so light. I'm going to start using bread flour for my donuts. I have just been transformed. I think I need to start using this one as my default donut, my go-to donut.
You also have very good eggs in Alberta. I've noticed that. The yolks are such a rich, rich color, and they make a pastry cream or a custard, just a beautiful texture and thickness. All right, I've got my butter's melted, so now I'm gonna whisk in just 2 tablespoons of milk, not the full measure.
Okay.
To start liquefying the icing sugar. And then I'm gonna whisk in, now I'm whisking in the melted butter. And you want the butter to be warm. You don't need it to cool down. And then we'll just fiddle with the consistency. So all the butter goes in.
Okay, and I'm gonna mix right in my melted butter dish.
Mm-hmm.
Icing sugar.
Yeah, so now this is with 2 tablespoons of icing sugar. My glaze is more that consistency that you would dip and put sprinkles on. It's a little too thick. So before I add more milk, I'm gonna add my 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla because I need that for the flavor. That's key to this particular donut recipe.
The vanilla. Sometimes I've used coffee in the glaze as well.
Ooh.
Or maple syrup.
Oh, that would be delicious. Yeah.
So good.
I'm just using a donut hole as a test to test out the consistency of my glaze. I'm just going in with my fingers.
Oh, smart.
I think there's no better way to do it.
You're such a pro.
So I've got a nice even coat. So I think I'm happy with this. I don't want any less or I don't want any more. So when you give the donuts a chance to set on the cooling rack, that butter solidifies again. And then you get almost a hint of a crackle on the outside, but it just melts the minute you take that bite. So now I've got a full-size one. I'm going in.
Do it.
And then fully submerge it, flip it over, and then the function of the hole is so you can hold it and shake off the excess glaze.
So how does this look? Like cream, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's it. So it should run off in a stream off of the donut.
Off of the donut into your mouth?
Exactly. Yeah, the fact that it gets on your hands is okay.
You could brown the butter first too, could you not?
Oh, it would be totally brilliant with brown butter.
Looks amazing. Okay, so I'm gonna dunk a few and drizzle a few. Oh, this looks perfect.
I'm just adding a touch more milk to my glaze because I think it's just a touch. I like a sheerer glaze.
There we go. Look at this. Look at.
Oh,
Anna
it's
Olson,
beautiful.
You're my hero. Look at the. You see, you could do a sheerer glaze. You could. I kind of like the.
Yeah, I'm going for that sort of full. Whoa, I'm getting it all over my laptop. I'm going for the full submerge. Every little inch of it is coated. So now I'm making a thicker glaze with the 1 cup of icing sugar and 2 tablespoons of milk in a separate bowl. And so that will be a little clingier. And I'm gonna skip the butter on that one. And so that way the sprinkles will stay on and dry.
I'm putting my sprinkles on right away so they stick. It sets quickly, hey? You gotta work fast.
It does. There, I just dipping it right in.
So you could make chocolate dipped donuts by putting a little bit of, would you put a bit of cocoa in the glaze?
A little melted chocolate would be great in the glaze too.
Mm-hmm.
Give it more flavor and of course the color.
You could melt it along with the butter, even a few chocolate chips, could you not?
Oh yeah, that would make perfect sense. Yep, probably just an ounce for this amount that we're doing today would be all you need.
Beautiful. And you know, the great thing about being alone here in my kitchen is I don't have to share.
If you make donuts and no one is there, it's like a tree falling in the forest.
Exactly.
It didn't happen. All right, how many have you eaten yet?
I haven't eaten any. I haven't eaten 0 donuts.
Well, I think it's quite clear we're going to keep dipping here, so I think I'm going to indulge.
I'm going to indulge in this perfect.
Oh, the one that has set. So the first one I dipped, what was that, 3 minutes ago, has already set up, so it's no longer sticky. Oh, all right. Cheers. Mm. Mm-hmm.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, yeah. I bit mine a little bit too. There. Look how light that is.
And it's really the donut, it's so soft and fluffy in the center, and it's not sweet. The sweetness we're getting is 100% from the glaze. There is that bit of sugar, but it's really just about the fluffiness and the richness too.
I'm going to take a bite out of all of them. Just, just to make sure.
It's
that
a
they're
look.
okay.
The half-bitten donut.
Oh, those are delicious.
I might as well crack into one of the big ones here. And
I think you
yeah,
should.
you really get that sense of lightness.
I think an unbearable lightness of donuts. Okay, I'm gonna tear this one open so I don't flatten it with my teeth. It has not quite set yet because I'm just that impatient. But look.
Woohoo! We did good!
It's got like a nice pull, like a nice chew to it as well. Oh, those are perfect donuts.
Well, this has been so fun. And you know what? Your baking expertise, like you've written baking cookbooks that are absolutely amazing. And like you've got that acumen, you've got that knowledge about how things like the flour behave. So I think between the two of us, our viewers and listeners have figured out a thing or two. And I'm guessing everybody now, if you weren't hungry at the beginning of this podcast, you are famished now and need to make donuts right away.
Yeah.
Julie, thanks so much for spending a baking day with me. This has been great fun. And it's also been fantastic sort of bringing back the memories I've had growing up making donuts with my grandma. So just power to you. We've learned a lot together and shared a lot. So thanks.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's going to be a great memory for me having virtually baked. We didn't even bake. It's going to be a great memory for me having virtually made donuts with you and shared them in this way. So, I've learned so much from you over the years. I will spend a baking day with you anytime.
It's a deal. We'll do it again. Yeah, I guess we should have called this frying day, but that's not quite as appealing.
Frying day. It's golden dough, right? So
that's it. Well, we have a phrase. Michael and I have a phrase. When you're having a really good day, you call it having a golden brown day. When everything just comes out perfectly golden brown. So I'd say we had a golden brown day.
We sure did. A sweet golden brown day.
Thank you for being a part of our baking day. I hope you felt like you were in the kitchen with us as we made a mess, cooked, shared baking tips, and had a laugh. You can buy your own copy of Baking Day through your favorite bookseller or order the ebook version online. That way, you can have your very own baking day. See you soon.